The judgment, the trials of Marcus, Pontius Pilatus, Pontius Pilate, are over, but the judgment of God is not. He found him guilty even though he knew he was innocent. If you haven't watched these previous videos, I'd encourage you to watch them. Let's move on. The next stage is a transitional period. Either he got scourged at this point for the second time, because John definitely had him scourged before. Maybe that was a lighter one and this is a heavy one. Maybe that was a heavy one and this is a lighter one. Jesus is really weakening, and this is a reason for the flogging and the whipping and all. Like I said, that's in the last video, because you kind of get them weak so that they're either going to die quicker on the crucifixion, or they're not going to struggle much as they bring him to the crucifixion. In my opinion, that's what I think. The next part says, in the soldiers of the governor. These are Pontius Pilate's actual soldiers. Now, he didn't have hundreds and hundreds around him. There were hundreds in Jerusalem. And I don't think, even though it goes on and says they took him, the soldiers took him into the common hall, we'll talk about that in a second, and gathered him unto the whole band of soldiers. The whole band of soldiers, that's 600 usually, although it could be 300 up to 1,000. Usually it's about 600. Well, let me share that real quick. How it is before, and I've said this before, how it was back then was they had different groups of Roman soldiers. A band is what's called a cohort. A cohort is 1/10, it's 1 out of every 10 soldiers of a legion, which is 6,000 usually. 6,000 soldiers in a legion, 1/10 of that is 600. And it could be 600 or between even 300 and 1,000, so it's kind of loosely identified. But hundreds of soldiers. But and by the way, that is broken up into 3 maniples, and each having 2 centuries, like 2 centurions. So that's kind of how they divided up the soldiers. And it says the whole band. Now, I don't think all 600, but I'm sure there were maybe a legion in that whole area. And the area that we're talking about is Jerusalem, especially during the Passover. That's when Pilate would bring a lot of the soldiers, because he was concerned about fights and riots and insurrections like the dude did, you know, Bar Abbas. Anyway, so we have this, it still could have been done there, but most, and I tend to think it's done over here in the Praetorium. And so I think there's a lot of soldiers there, maybe several hundred, and then there's maybe 200, 300 there. I think that's the whole band that he took. I don't think he took all of the 600 and came in that space of the Praetorium. And the Praetorium, if you remember, as I've talked about, is like a castle. The Praetorium is around the castle, or the palace, I should say. And the Antonia is more like a castle, by the way. But this is probably where Pilate would have done his judgment. And he went in and went out and went in and talked to Jesus. And he brought him out. Then he sat here in the on the seat at least twice, and the second one he finally had to sit down to be able to give the judgment call, to give the verdict, to say you're guilty. He had to be sitting. That was a tradition that they had to do. It's like behind the bench of a court case. Okay, so this is where the soldiers, I think, brought him. Maybe there's an opening here, maybe here. Came in here, and these are rooms, big rooms and all, and then he brought him. I think the soldiers brought him to a large, very large courtyard, and that's where they did the whipping. And then they brought him in, and they made fun of him, and they literally had a big game of it. They played this terrible game. They played dirty. It was bad, and that's what this kind of describes. I'll kind of describe some of it, but they really did a mocking. They made fun of him, and they made sport, basically. And that's when a lot of them came in there. And they were laughing, mocking. It was ruthless. And I don't know if any of them had any conscience. Maybe some of them like, this is really bad that we're doing this, but they did it because of the peer pressure. Don't follow crowds. All right, so here's what they did. The soldiers of the governor took Jesus into that common hall, that judgment hall, that court yard, most likely, and gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers. A bunch of them came. And they either took all his clothes off or they took the outer robe. Probably the outer robe, I'm not sure. It says they stripped him and put on him, and this word scarlet is red. The word scarlet means red, but it's also a purple or red. And like Mark and, is it Mark and John or Mark and Luke, I think. Mark and John, I think, say purple. But it's okay. That word it was used interchangeably. I mean, they weren't that particular on it. And maybe it was a reddish color in the purple. Purple having a sense of royalty. By the way, the robe that they're going to put on him, or the robe that they put on him, could have been from Herod's trial. When we get into Herod's trial, he gave him a robe, so he may have had that one. Or most likely it was actually a small coat or a small sort of, it could have been wool or something that went over like officers and generals, and even some of the soldiers wore it. It's a buckle right here, a clasp of some sort on the right shoulder, and it kind of hung down like this, and it went over this way, wrapped around him, and maybe one arm was more open than the other. Sort of, I think, and they put that on him, a scarlet robe. And when they had, then they weaved together. Here they are doing some terrible things to him. By the way, at the other scourging, or maybe at this point, I think this is when they literally took the beard of Jesus. Not that he had this thick of a beard. They literally took it off his face. It's during this time, I think. I don't think the Sanhedrin over there did it in Caiaphas' house. I don't think that's when it happened. I think right here they were just beating him up and whipping him. It was really bad. Now, how do you know? Because it's not mentioned here, because in Isaiah 50 it describes it. Isaiah 50, 52, 53, and other places, especially those, there's really a lot of other descriptions. This is where it talks about, I gave my back to the smiters, so they whipped me. And then later we're going to get into, well, I already quoted, he was wounded for our transgressions. I said that last time. So all those verses are, he's fulfilling all this. This is 700 years, I would say, before this happened. That was predicted by God. God saw all this. The spitting that was mentioned, he got spit on, by the way, twice in this passage, plus in that Sanhedrin. They spit it. And by the way, in that time, in that period, in that age, in the ancients, with the ancients, it was really insulting. It's mentioned in the Old Testament, by the way, but not just about Jesus being spit on, but it's spit. It's insulting now. But imagine just spitting on it. Maybe that was their form of kissing him. Well, I don't know. I mean, an evil, mocking, insulting kiss. But it was very low. It was considered even lower back then, maybe, than it is now. I don't know. They stripped him, put on a scarlet robe, and when they wove together a crown. So they took something like this. Let me get this real quick. This is plastic, it's fake. They took a crown, and there's a lot of, let me see if I can weave, no, I'm not going to be able to weave all this together, but there's a lot of bushes like this, that's around that area, all over, the area. So it could have been right outside, it could have been a little bit, like a little bit out. They knew of it, and they took this, and they made a wreath, probably a wreath, maybe a bowl, and they made a crown. You know what they're doing, don't you? They're mocking him like he's the king, because they knew that was the big issue here with Pontius Pilate. They knew, and some of them were out there watching this, guarding him so nobody tried to run and get him off of the stage, so to speak, where he was judged there. But here it is. They put it together. Now, I actually have thorns, and it could be 2 inches to 8 inches. These, and by the way, a thorn bush can actually go up to like 5-6 feet. A lot of bushes in that area, and so here's actual things. Can you imagine that? Now they could have did most of them sticking out like it looks like a crown, like out. Chances are some of them could have been in, and then, you know, pressing down on the skin, pressing down on it. And what they actually did is, well, let me read it for sure. I could just tell you, but let me read it. It says they put it on his head and a reed in his hand, like some sort of stick here. It's possible that it was like a bat, or heavy as a bat, like a baseball bat. But it's a reed, a stick, a walking stick or something. They found that. Or maybe it was a stick that they used to beat the criminals. Remember I said they actually took sticks and they used it to beat some of the, like the soldiers or something. And then it says they beat him. Well, it says they put on his head and a reed in his hand. First they put a reed in his hand as if it's a, like this or something, as if it's a scepter. You know, kings had this long stick that they could use as a scepter. It's like a royal thing. They're really going on and on about him being like king. And they were laughing and insulting and making fun. And Jesus just stood there and took it all for you and me. And so a reed in his right hand, and that's where the king holds it. They bowed the knee before him, and that's what they did with Caesar. You know, they literally bowed their knee. They're just mocking him like crazy. Here he has a robe, you know, like a Roman robe, a short coat or something to that effect. And they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." A-V-E. I don't know how to pronounce that. Ave, King of the Jews, which is actually what they would say to Caesar. Hail, Caesar. Okay, so King of the Jews. See, you're the King of the Jews. And here's what it says, and they spit on him, and they took the reed. They decided, hey, let's do this. And they may have passed it around or something, and literally hit him on the head with that, with the crown there, I believe. And maybe they hit the crown to get it more into it. I don't know. Sorry, but and they hit him over and over. It's an imperfect tense. I believe it means it goes over and over. And after that, they mocked him. They kept mocking him, and then they took the robe off of him, put on his own robe. They put his own robe on him and led him away now to crucify him. And we'll go into maybe the direction of where he went, the location. It was probably, I don't know, it's maybe 9 o'clock in the morning. Probably the trials took, maybe like or that definitely took all morning, but it maybe came up to around 9 o'clock. According to the scripture, it was about 9. So I think that might be all I want to share with you. I think I shared the part right there. It's really serious what he went through, and I'm kind of glad that we're kind of going slowly talking about what Jesus Christ went through. Imagine the emotion though in Jesus, the feelings. So as he's just feeling all this rejection and hatred, what's really, the word is ironic. It's like, whoa. They were mocking him and making fun. He truly was not only the King of the Jews, he was their king. He's the king of the universe, you know, and he's the king of all people. He's the king of Pontius Pilate and Caesar. He's the king of kings and Lord of lords. So they had no idea. If they knew what they were doing, they would literally say, "We're so sorry," and they would bow their knees. Who knows, some of them watching him. I know, by the way, later we'll get to it, one of the leaders of the soldiers literally got saved at the cross. Pretty cool. He really gave his life. Oh, it wasn't just him too. The Bible notes that him and others. So we'll talk about how many were around the cross, how many soldiers, but we'll get into that soon, but I don't want to get there too soon. Let me read this whole thing again one more time. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the judgment hall and gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers, whatever group was right there. And they stripped him and put on him a scarlet/purple robe. It's probably purple looking, or maybe it was red, but they didn't care about color identifications as much. And when they had woven together, they took a crown and wove it together. They put it on his head, and a reed in his hand, and they bowed their knees before him, and mocked him, made fun of him, insulting him, and said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they were laughing and joking, and they spit on him, and took the reed and smote him on the head. And after they mocked him, they took the robe off from him. So, by the way, I mean, the more you keep thinking about this, the robe on and off was killing his back. You know, this is like, ugh, it was starting to dry some, and you just rip it off. Oh, sorry. And I mean, it's just pain, 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 pain all the way through. And he spoke not a word, and I don't even think he yelled out in pain and groaned. Like this, just kept it to himself when he was going through all this. Imagine being hit on the head over and over with a stick, and with the crown of thorns, blood, you know. And I think this is where this especially, this and especially the first scourging, including this and what he already went through somewhat with the Sanhedrin, you know, swollen eyes and all that because they hit him with their fists and all this is where another Isaiah passage I mentioned before said that he was marred beyond recognition. He didn't even look like his disciples would not have been able to recognize him. And he just almost didn't look human. It was just, you know, they didn't break any bones, and that's important for later, because that was a prophecy also, is not one of his bones would be broken, which is cool. But, you know, it was like, he was really a mess, just like he'd gone into a boxing match and had more than one fighter hitting him, you know. And it literally says, I can turn to that real quick, Isaiah, so I can really read what it says here. Let me turn to it. Wow, bless his heart. Thank you, Lord Jesus. This is in chapter 52. The prophecies are throughout Isaiah, probably more than any other book. Zechariah has a lot of them too, but Isaiah, Psalms is a number of them too, but Isaiah I think has most of them, I would guess. But 53 is the big one. Wow, that whole chapter is really big time about Jesus and his wounds and what he went through. But in chapter 52, right before it, in 14, it says this, and many were astonished at him, like when they saw him, when he started going through the streets, probably I don't know if it was yelling or maybe dead silence at times. I mean, just, they were astonished at him. And his appearance was so marred, more than any man, and I think that really actually is indicating that he didn't even look like a man, just more than a man, like he didn't even look human. And it says, and his form more than the sons of men. His form and everything, just how he looked, was really a mess. But I love the next verse. It says, so shall he sprinkle many nations. See, it was all that blood and everything that he could sprinkle the peoples of the world, you and me. Thank God for the blood of Jesus. All right, thanks for listening. God bless you. And do fall in love with Jesus. He's worth it.